Let's switch gears and see where we find these concepts in the product. As we open a portfolio plan, we see the main navigation structured exactly into planning with the iron triangle of scope, teams and releases straight there, as well as reporting. The visual schedule is organized by JIRA projects, so you can define releases or milestones along the timeline. You also see that if you have a hard cutoff date, like here the iOS 1.0 release, this release turns red in case the current forecast suggests that this is not a realistic cutoff date. Issues are organized into a configurable hierarchy. In this case, we see that we have a large cross-cutting initiative, Team Turbo mobile apps, and underneath epics and stories. Portfolio automatically aggregates progress all the way from subtasks up to the initiative to see how far along is that Team Travel mobile apps initiative overall. By switching through the hierarchy levels, we can look at the schedule in more detail. In this case, we can not only see that individual work items for each of the projects, but we also see some of them have little indicators at the beginning, at the end. Those are indicators for dependencies. By clicking them, we can easily see that, in this case, the iOS and Android projects both depend on new API access points done by the platform team. Understanding dependencies and their impact across teams is key to reacting early in case anything changes. Now that we have an overview, we can dive into how to plan and scope releases. First, we'll have a closer look into what's happening with that iOS release, which actually shows up as red. So in order to do so, we'll filter down to the iOS project to focus our efforts on exactly the work that is allocated to that. And we see that actually there's the iOS release being red here, and one particular epic, the team invitations, that is apparently not fitting into the scope here. A very easy solution would just be to take team invitations out of the scope. And by doing so, we can reallocate that, assign that to the 1.5 release, recalculate the schedule, and we actually see that would actually turn the 1.0 release back on track. Now that we have set up our projects that way, with resourcing behind that, teams and capacities, we have an easy way to play with different what-if scenarios. So what if a new initiative, a new idea came up in marketing, and that would actually require the team to be able to process coupon codes? Again, we can very easily simulate that what-if scenario. Let's just try it out and add this new epic accepting coupon cons into the scope. We can directly inline create, inline edit, new data here. Let's just put in a ballpark estimate and recalculate the schedule. We'd see that without assigning, there's no more scope or no more capacity left in the 1.0 release. So that would probably be pushed out. And as you could imagine with the marketing department, likely they won't be too happy with doing that post the 1.0 release. Imagine you're sitting together in a meeting now and you have this plan handy. With all stakeholders with that information on the table, it's very easy to try and see how you can shuffle priorities to actually get alignment and get an agreement. So let's take marketing coupon codes back into the scope for 1.0. We see naturally that's going to push out the date. So instead, we'll actually have to deprioritize group booking experience. We'll shift that further down. We see that actually it pushes post 1.0 into 1.5 and beyond, but it puts our 1.0 timeline back onto track. So we've simply made a transparent decision to take something else out of the scope, prioritize something else higher. As long as everyone is on board that this change is actually the better way to spend our time, you'll definitely have buy-in from the teams to actually make those changes. Up until now, we've played through different planning options here in Portfolio, but all these changes have not been applied back to the issues in JIRA. This has a couple of advantages. You can try out different options without distracting your team, and actually, while you're playing around, no change notifications are triggered until your plan is actually ready. And also, this makes it very easy to revert your changes if you're not happy with the resulting plan. However, Once you're ready to put the plan to action, it's very easy to commit those changes with JIRA, now with Portfolio 2. We see that all changes we've made have these little orange markers, these little orange trackers in there. And up in the header, we see a list of now 3 uncommitted changes. We can simply click those and see also the details by clicking that link on what actually has changed. Like, for example, we've shifted here the release assignment. We can directly commit all those changes, and all of our JIRA issues underneath are going to be up to date. Now that we've seen how to turn the first of our 3 dials, scope, resource, and time, let's move on to the second one, teams. Let's assume we have our committed roadmap for the iOS project, but one team member decides to switch from working full-time to only 2 days a week from the time from April through June. We can easily analyze the impact of this change and see how we can best plan around it. Let's go to the team section, and we'll actually just find and open the iOS team, and inside there we see Alana represented. She's currently working full-time, but we can easily model that exception to the weekly hours from April all the way through to June. Say the weekly hours reduced to 2 days a week or 16 hours, adding a little description. And with that, as we make that change and recalculate the schedule, we can directly see the impact. Unfortunately, this change actually has material impact on the schedule. We see that it puts our release date at risk. So it's something we need to actually react to. It's good that we figured that out early, so we can directly try out what our options are. After discussing with all stakeholders, there's an idea that Ryan from the Android team could possibly help out here. So let's first take a look at also the Android team's schedule. And we'll extend the filter to also include the Android app here. We see that their current schedule is on track. They plan to ship at the same time. So let's see if we add Ryan here from the Android team into the iOS team. So we see that he's working normally full-time for the Android team, and now we'll simply put his regular hours for the iOS team to 0, but temporarily make him available. So let's say he's helping out from May all the way through the end of June for 32 hours a week. And once again, by making this change, after we recalculate the schedule, we can directly see what it means for these projects and how it's impacting. On to the third dimension of the Iron Triangle, time. We've mentioned before that time is represented by releases and their respective release dates. In the releases section here in Portfolio, we see all the releases that are currently included in the plan listed by the JIRA project. We can open the details of a release to see how is it configured, and it's also easy to figure down to exactly one particular release, like the iOS beta release, to see exactly how it's tracking. Right now, it still has a bit of a buffer. The work is still scheduled to start as early as possible, but there's a fixed release date by the end of April. As we look at the schedule, the current forecast says 14th of April, so there's a bit of a time in between. We have a bit of a buffer. Let's see what it means if we play with these different release dates and scheduling options here. We see that actually if we change to a dynamic release date, we'll simply see that the release will stretch exactly as long as the work that's scheduled for it. So as before, we knew that the work is taking us until mid-April. We see that this is exactly the date the release is going to take. The third case that's possible is actually the case where we say we have a fixed release date, but that fixed release date is actually not realistic. So let's assume we would aim here for early April for that release, and we calculate. We see that, of course, the work will not magically get done faster. But Portfolio helps here with flagging that actually by highlighting the release in red, showing the targeted end date, which is 1st of April now, and the actual forecasted end date, so that, again, this is flagged to all the stakeholders, and you can make a conscious decision about how you're going to address that situation. The releases we've seen so far were all for a single project. But what if we need to coordinate a release across multiple projects? How can you easily see which project is the current long pole and if everything is on track? This is where cross-project releases come into play. So let's remove the filter that looks at these two separate projects only in order to get an overview across all the different projects. We see now a section showing up here for cross-project releases, and we can easily create a new cross-project release. For example, we'll create a cross-project release called Payments 2.0, which involves work of the platform team as well as the Team Travel mobile web team. And actually, as so often, we actually have a hard date of 31st of May, or at least it's our current target. Now we see that the cross-project release is being created, and it's represented across these two projects, the platform team and the mobile web team. Currently both, as we haven't assigned work yet, both are scheduled to be ending on the 31st of May, as we've configured that as our static end date. Once the cross-project release is defined, we can easily assign work to it. As we come back to the scope section, we can now actually assign complete initiatives that might be spanning multiple projects to just one aligned cross-project release. And as we do so, we can actually see if that date is realistic across all the different projects. So we see, for example, that here we do have a challenge now within the platform team. Let's filter this down. We see that the web development team's work quite easily fits in, but we do have a challenge with the platform team to make that cutoff date. If we drill down to the epic level, we actually see again in more detail that the problem is, first of all, the platform team can't start that work early enough, and then the billing system's backend turns into the current long pole for their work. From here, of course, we could start to prioritize different work items as we've seen it before. So it's the same game of playing around with scope and time. Let's assume for the time being this is simply a must-have thing. So we'll just move back to the releases section and we'll actually adjust the date of the cross-project release. So we can easily align all the projects towards a new date. Let's say we aim for the end of June instead, and that actually still gives us a bit of a buffer in both projects for the web team that actually allows us to pick up a bit more work even into that milestone. Finally, the reporting section brings all data together in one view. There's a couple of important reports here in the reporting section. First, there's the themes report. The themes report is used to set a target resource allocation according to business goals or current business focus areas. When we look at those, we actually see that for each of the themes, we can define a target, and we also see the current estimate as to your backlog, as well as the actual time spent. For the actual time spent, it's important that we also pay attention to the time period we're looking at the actuals. So, for example, if we want to see the actuals for the last quarter, then we can set here an additional filter and we see how the actual allocation looked like. So, for example, for our theme to drive engagement, we targeted to spend about 20% of our time, but actually we spent almost half our time, 48%, with actual work items that contributed to that theme. So that clearly shows if we're aligned to the overall priorities or we're actually failing to deliver on certain things that seem to be important to us. Like, for example, the partner network theme here, we haven't done any work in that area or anything that contributes to increased bookings, another important theme here. The next report we're going to look at is the releases report. So let's switch the view to the releases report. This one gives a compact overview on all of the releases structured per project. And again, if releases are off track, those directly get flagged. The nice thing about the releases report is it not only allows you to show the timeline, but also what's scheduled in this time period on the level of initiatives, or even more granular down to the level of epics and user stories. So I can actually see when are my next important milestones, are they on track, how are we progressing, and what exactly is scheduled in that particular time frame. Finally, the last view we have, as we switch back granularity here to the initiatives level, is the full schedule report, the full program schedule. We've used that already before when we did planning, but this one really gives a full screen view. And again, we can break it down into different levels of granularity, initiatives or epics. We can split it up into either a global view or a view per JIRA projects. And of course, we can do all the filtering here. So we could, for example, filter down to a theme like driving engagement, which gives us directly a view of what are we doing across all of our different projects, who is contributing to that, and what do they have in their schedule for when. This really is the one self-service information center for each of your programs of work to understand what's the current schedule, what are current focus areas or themes, as well as what's upcoming milestones, what's coming when, how does that line up exactly on the timeline. This takes us to the end of this brief product walkthrough. Let's sum things up. Portfolio for JIRA is really designed to give visibility across all teams and projects. Individual teams do their work as they are used to and as they're familiar with JIRA. In JIRA software, on their boards, they plan sprints, track their day-to-day work. Portfolio for JIRA rolls that up into what we call a portfolio plan. Portfolio plans help to plan and scope releases, build and share a long-term roadmap, track progress on epics and initiatives, forecast completion dates, and also coordinate cross-project releases and dependencies. This really allows to strike this crucial balance between autonomous teams, but also providing visibility on top of that by having a transparent picture of what's the plan, as well as how we are tracking towards that plan. This takes us to the end of this webinar. Thanks for watching.